tēnā rawara e pā, I e hōuia. E tō mātai matua nui te rangi, tū a uri whā io io. Ka tikara hoki, he kōra nui anō I te tangata, I te hapori. Kia whakamoe mititia kōkoe, nā. I e hōui ana, kia whakamoe mititia, kia whakanuia kōkoe. Ai tā i e hiuhi. Mene, ka piti hono ka tātai hono, ko rātau rā te mate. Kua riro atu, riro noa atu, ki tū atu o te ārai o te mate, ki reira ngaro atu ai, ki ko nānā ngaro atu ai, ki ko nānā whakangaro atu, ki te kānohi mate kia rātau I te hapu, tauwhanga noa ke atu nei, kia rātau, haere, whakauti atu. Ka piti hono ka tātai hono, ko tātau mā ano tēnei tātau tonu, e tātau mā, koa. E ko te ka nohi ora no tēnā rā tātau, kia tātau mā ano tātau mā tau koa. E no reira kai te mihi atu. Kai te mihi atu, he nui ano he kahano, no tātau mā tau te kara hui mai ano ai. I ngā kōrero whakataunga kreme, kōrero Taunaha tūpuna, kōrero Taunaha wenua, Taunaha whenua, me ki o Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. E no reira nau mai haere, tēnā rātātau, kei te mihi atu. Mauri ora, kahuri, ai rā hoki e tātou mā, kia ora, ka nui te mihi, ngā mihi ake atu e tātou mā, nau mai haere ki roto, a ki ngā kōrera whakataunga kreme, Taunaha tūpuna, Taunaha wenua, o Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. Kia ora, good to be back representing the TeTaiRawhitiAukatiTai, tō tātou mātou nā EasternDivide meki, tō tātou nā tēnā wāhi wenua kia tātou mātou mōhio tonu I hone, kei reira ngā tūāhuatanga katoa, ki tēnei mea te māhinga kai, ki te e rao ngā tāonga, kai roto kai te kūrei, ngā kūrei tangara, ngā tūpuna mātua, kei reira, kei konana, kei ngā wāhi kai, mai mahara tonu I hoa nō rā tātou mātou, ki ngā tūāhuatanga ki te kai, I roto te wā o te taua. All those things, we remember for the OureeEKomao, the OureeEKomao. Wonderful memories and recollections there are in the east of the plentifulness of kai, a well-known area mo te mahinga kai, I te mahinga kai, aroha mai. I said more te mahinga kai. And so just talking about some of those special and unique characteristics about the EasternDivide that we never want to forget. That plentiful, lots of mana in the EasternDivide because there's lots of beautiful kai that we always remember about the EasternDivide. And we also remember their that awesome characteristic that they have. They were also able to save a lot of kai during times of war. That's what I was talking about as well. During times of war, when they would start to eat the plentifulness of the clay in the area as well. All those characteristics of the Eastern Divide point to why the Moai Hapu iwi colouring of the area is the grey colour, the light grey for the Eastern Divide. No reira nau mai haere piki kake haramai, u mai kiroto, hou mai kiroto. Aye, yeah. Welcome everybody. We have some awesome kōrero today. We're going to get right into it. The kōrero around te tiriti, the old money. No need for getting into our Eastern Divide stuff. That's really cool, because the Eastern Divide is sort of really picked up on where they really should be, the direction that they should be going in their primary hapu iwi of the Eastern Divide should be going in that direction. And so they've picked up things really well, including the Moriori in the Eastern Divide, and they've started to move in that direction, far more successful. If they have a good look at things, their accomplishments are so much greater for the now and for the future, for our future generations, if they start to pick up where we're at, us, all those of us within the Tutura kanakana. O roto ia mātou tonu, kai te whai tonu ake rā mātou i te tūāhuatanga i wai ho mai anō ai nei, ki roto ki a mātou e ngā mātua, e ngā tūpuna mātua, e rātou rā, nō rātou ka whakaaro nui ke atu nei, ki a tātou mātou ki roto tēnei rā, tātou mātou ngā whakatupuranga kai te haere, ki ngā rā kai mua i a rātou. Yes, they remembered us, they toiled for these are the examples that we remember, those special, unique characteristics that they left us. All our tupuna, that's why we have what do you call those memorandums, or what do you call them? I can't remember the word, sorry, Tata Ma, you might remember the word better than me, but for reminiscing and remembering, just paying remembrance and paying respects to those who have gone by. That's why we always do that. Every time we jump on and call it, it's a customary thing to always do that. When making speeches, when enduring kōrero, persevering with kōrero, that's very, very special. And in fact, it's kōrero likened to kōrero that you would use on the marae. Te tū kōrero i te marae, koe nei, e nei, momo o te kōrero, e kōrero tia nei te wā. Ia te wā, haramai ai, e ahau, tū ai, noho ake atu, ki roto ki ngā kōrero nei whakataunga, kleme. So really happy to be back and on behalf of the Eastern Divide, bring our kōrero for Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. And it's definitely te tiriti today. Where we start off is just a very brief recap. We cover more of the conclusions towards the end there. You would have noticed in our last kōrero last week, I purposely left some of the conclusions. Some of you would have thought, oh, hey, what about the division? They were separatists, weren't they? And they were, yes, that's one of the conclusions of the Crown, one of the things that they achieved as a result of the culmination of everything. You understand why though, You understand why. I'm actually focusing on how they manipulated this piece. It's like a piece of artwork. And I used to be an artist, but I'm not too sure if I'm that good at that now. When I was younger, music took me over, and so I had to choose between art and music, and music took me. So I started to mess about, and you got more music from me in my art studies than anything else. So, and that was a shame, because I hung out with guys who were just so dedicated to being musos and stuff like that. So away I went into the music world and flaunted my stuff out there in the music world, and done really well. And in fact, as an amateur, I did really well too. It's not just as a professional that you can do really well. In fact, some amateurs go on to remain amateur if they know their craft that well, and I did. I knew my craft that well. I could have remained amateur, but actually I'm thankful that I didn't. I'll tell you why. So I learned some things about music, about the music space, that I would never have known. Yeah, I would have had to be years and years and years in the worldwide music industry before I learned all those things. So, yeah, better to know them now, I figure, before you go out into the big wide world. But of course, I've got no time now for the big wide world of music, and my music takes up love songs and a cover band, and that's it. I have a cover band. We do reggae and all sorts of R&B, soul, gospel-y type numbers, and and mostly love songs, and because they're easy. That's the simplest thing you can do. So you know what, we can put together a performance in about an hour. And so it doesn't take too long, an hour, or maybe even 2 hours. We could put together a performance, put together a bracket for anybody. And because love songs are just that simple to put together, and that easy to remember. They've got such easy structures. Okay, so that's what I'm doing at the moment for my music. But meanwhile, in the Eastern Divide, where we are focusing on te tiriti, on the all money, and on Aloha mai, and on the Magna Carta, or the Magna Carta e tatauma, we understand, or I'm trying to bring you to that greater understanding. I'm trying to create for you some laterality whilst you're enjoying being there. I've created for you the entire of the scene, everything that was going on in that moment in time, of the event of the signing, and everything that went down right up into that evening. It's like you were, just like being there, you know. And I've created that purposely because I want you to experience that and know that that's exactly what happened, and know what that would have been like. Not just for the Crown, who are probably really overexcited by the time it came to taking te tiriti, or the All Money, or the Magna Carta around the Motu. They were probably just so excited. That's probably why it took so, it was so hastily taken around the country in the way that it was, because they were just too excited by the time. Okay? And look at Tatauma, they actually, they had created this massive machine, well-oiled machine. So that's how we know. It had to have taken at least 2 years to put together such a well-oiled machine. They had created this, and here it was, working. It was actually working right in front of their very eyes, and that's what I wanted you to see. How this machine, this well-oiled machine, rori-rori as it was, rori-rori in the way that it was put together as it was, you understand firsthand exactly what they had done, exactly how they had manipulated all of the componentries that they had at their disposal and fooled so many of our tūpuna mātua into signing. Okay? The worst part, though, is what happened afterwards and how they were able to hold up and contain everybody in the mutu from there being able to be any blowouts, any explosions, any, kei pukurirawa, kei takarirawa te tānga tangata I te mutu. Okay, ngā hapu iwi whānauri, they had to keep them pretty much in check. They had to keep them in check. And that was being done purposely. E tatai mawai, because they wanted to be able to contain our hapu me te ariki, me ko te ariki. And they wanted to make sure that those hapu me ko te ariki were going to remain somewhere around peaceable, somewhere around there. Of course, it wasn't like that. In some places like Wairarapa by 1840, and I gave you the wrong dates, it's 1840 to 1853, so it started right on 1840 in Wairarapa, so Tahumaakaakanuimatua were well on to what was going on, and they weren't happy with the drive to get access to land. That was the first take in Wairarapa, and that's why we started to get angry, and all our seniorship started to rise up against the Crown. They were really worried, and there was a 13-year standoff. That's a long time to be standing off, and for any wrong. I mean, we've just finished a 15-year one in Wairarapa, and it's still going. We could end up with all-out war in Wairarapa. I'm not joking to you. Same thing, different situation, same sort of actors, one controlled by the Crown and the Tutura, o roto I a Tahumaakaakanuimatua o te hapu me ko te ariki, so yeah, same sort of peripheries, same sort of trajectories, same sort of componentries, just a whole different time, whole different situation, but we've got the same thing today. If you tell me that the Crown has changed, I'd never believe you. If the Crown today continues to cause so many problems and so many situations as the such in Wairarapa, the 15-year standoff that's just happened, same thing happened there 1840 to 1853, right up until our teina, and in fact our most teina, it crumbled. Really, they crumbled under the pressure. And they gave them access to the land. It wasn't too far. There was 1851 access to the land. Wasn't too far. Wasn't too long after that. Kāre te tino roa, tarorawake. And you got sales happening. Rangi Wakaoma. Remember me pointing out Rangi Wakaoma in Wairarapa, that's Castle Point. The whole of the land block, te tāwaha katoa, te poraka katoa o Rangi Wakaoma, hoko nā tuai. And for a song. And that's sad, was the kahunu rangitane that gave into that. And that was 13 years later, and that's cunning. Because lots of the original ancestries that stood up were no longer. They kept, the Crown kept discouraging different areas of our culture, breaking down the pillars of our Tuturu society. They kept breaking them down, making sure that they corroded at a certain point. After that 13 years, they crumbled. Kahungnurangitāne, they crumbled. And not only that, but once they got access, it wasn't too long, somewhere around 1862 to 1865, and on to 1912, circa 1912 AD, that all of a sudden the Crown was saying that all of the land, because they had forged all of the land deeds right through there over that time, forged all the land deeds as a result of sales. They forged them all under Kahungnurangitāne because they knew they had access as a result of obtaining that access in 1853 and the first sale. And come up to 1865, next thing you know, everything's going through the land court because it legally has to. Land that doesn't go through the land court got confiscated. Ka murua rawahia. Murua noatia anohia tēnā wenua. Okay? So you know where most of our tūākana, most of our lands ended up. Either under Kahungnurangitāne illegally or confiscated. Okay, because that was how the land court machine, another one of their big well-oiled machines, the same as the racial parliament in 1854, another well-oiled machine, and then the Crown battling some of the Hapu meko te ariki in the Motu, Tauranga, Waikato, Ngāpuhi, for example, all those battles. And you know what? The Crown struggled to win. By rights, by that time, really, realistically, the Crown had so much dominance in the Motu, and they were taking over clearly in the Motu so strongly, and internationally they were dominating right over the country so well that actually, in actual fact, they should have won all those wars, but they didn't. Okay? And we're quite proud of those Hapu meko te ariki and the Uri whānau Uri that were with them, who trounced the Crown over those times. That was really well done. Well done. We thought at looking over a lot of their battles. Very, very sad though. Very, very hurt for those awhitu rāhoki mātau ia rātau tonu ngā mea o rātau kahinga tonu atu, kahinga rawa, i roto ngā pakanga, i roto i te haere taua. But we got some wins out of there. Lucky for that. Katoa te toa, katoa te rangatira, toa noai te ariki, me ko nana hapu. And so, following on e tātou mā, from the fraud and the ability to appeal to the internationally and show off illegally the English version of the treaty because they had thrown away the contra preferentum, because if sovereignty had been handed over, then it was likely that contra preferentum didn't matter. But all of that remains illegal. As it was then, it still is illegal now. Okay? So we have a very interesting situation, don't we? We have a very interesting situation. But I'm driving the point. I'm driving that point. I'm hoping that you're getting that the native ear, when the native ear hears the native word or the native tongue, no matter what sort of way in which it were used. I mean, this was by people that were far from native, but they had learned to conduct themselves in te reo nonetheless. They had spent 98 years studying te reo. And so they were at a particular standard. They weren't quite level 1 of that time. I stand by my words on that. My assessment is final on that. I will not change that. Okay? They weren't quite level 1 of that time. You look at the remarkable work of the missionaries over that time, and you would think they were much greater. But then I've looked through all their work. That's what the problem is. And there's a lot of shoddy stuff in there, if you have a good look. Okay? And you really have to know your stuff. You really have to know your reo to understand that that's really the sort of standard and quality of their work. It wasn't as great as you might think. So whilst the crown was whilst the crown was controlling and manipulating the whole of the world of the missionaries, they were in part being covered, really, because they weren't as good as they needed to be. See? Do you see? And I was dying to give you that information, but I wasn't at the point where I was going to give you that information. But they were really covering a little bit. You know why? Because they had made their own contractual agreements over that time. And one of those contractual agreements, e Tautama, was that the crown would make the missionaries look a lot better than they actually really were. And the missionaries agreed that they would do a job, to the standard that they could, and that's the standard I find in there was just below level 1. So they can't escape me. They never fooled me. But I'll tell you something. They're just under level 1 because I'll tell you why. I'm not silly. Most of their vocabulary lists, a little too narrowly focused and a little too they're not just a Pākehā worldview. I mean, we talk about a Pākehā worldview, but there was also a crown worldview in a lot of their work. Okay, and so why did the crown cover for the missionaries? Well, because the crown could not do this job, or they did the same for Hiwakaputanga. The Declaration of Independence, they did the same thing. They covered for them through that too. And yes, some people say our tūpuna were duped. Well, they were by He Whakaputanga. They were duped, and that's how they got duped into Te Tiriti, was through He Whakaputanga. But the duping was mostly done by He Whakaputanga. Okay, so they got sucked right into the likelihood of treatments from the crown. They were pretty much going to deliver exactly what our tūpuna mātua needed. And what was it? He rawara hoki tērā kai te roro. E whakaroa nuitia nanei. Lawlessness. They wanted to rid the land of that. And so, interestingly enough, we come up to the preamble today. A little bit later on, we're going to discuss at length the preamble. But for now, we're still going to focus, e tataumā, because we need to, on the legal te tiriti, on the te tiriti in the native indigenous te reo of reo hapu iwi, of Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura, of known also this particular brand of the reo hapu iwi, of te awa hapu iwi, and of course also of Moai hapu iwi. And in fact, this brand is mostly Moai hapu iwi. Okay, and that's why all three of us knew that. Why? And why did we share it between all three of us, or why did we all know it? Because we're so closely connected. Our interrelations are so close, and so in the closeness of interrelations, even the most confidential, the most private of kupu and discussions and their forms were discussed. Were utilised at length between those who they needed to be utilised by within the absolutely totally interconnected interrelationships of our hapu iwi. Needless to say, Moai hapu has central consistencies before te awa hapu iwi. Okay, so it's not just our lines that are in there, but there's also central Moai hapu iwi in there. Okay, we just don't get to mention that a lot, and we'll talk about them in future. We don't need to at the moment, so it's not as though, but they're not actually hapu iwi. Yeah. That's probably why mostly those connections are not talked about a lot. They're uri whānau uri, and they're hapu ure tārewa. So a lot of the hapu ure tārewa of Moai hapu come through those ancestries and the central consistencies, which is where we come from, through te awa hapu iwi, through Tutura te matua hapu ure tārewa whānauri, and of course, which is the ancestry from within which we descend. Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura hapu iwi. Okay, e tatama. And why focus on that manipulation? Because that's very, very important, very, very fundamental to this argument, that we understand that clearly. Because the native ear is what got manipulated in the whole of the sequencing and the whole. This well-oiled machine was built to fool the naked ear of the native indigenous person, associated with the gatherings. And that's why I'm impressing on you those particular ways in which they did that. Okay, they absolutely fooled. They absolutely fooled. Rori ke noiho nei, no rātau, o rātau, ki te takotoranga tonu, o te ni mea te kupu. Because they knew how to sway. And like we've been talking about, those minor details are new tirani, new tireni. Hanei, tā huatanga ina, ua rā ngona ke atuai, e au, tērā. Pēnā hoki me te mea āhau he reo take. A tēnā pēwhea tonu hoki, taku rāngona ke ake atu, ki taua kupu, taua pū, ahanei. Okay, so what am I likely to be, what are my likely responses to these, or be they very minor to most people? The double meanings, the particular words, dash, the tohus, dash, te kāwanatanga. The conundrum in the evening, how that was brought in. Okay? And how that conundrum, where in English culture around that time, governance and sovereignty were almost one and the same thing, which didn't really matter in the end. I mean, it was a nuance, and even if we weren't talking about a nuance, it still wouldn't have mattered, because this was native indigenous reo. Okay? And what actually mattered, see, but our pōtu puna mātua, you got to kāroha hoki rātai. Kāroha hoki rātai, you know? You got to feel sorry for them because they knew nothing about how to argue against these little maneuvers in the entirety of this heist that were being made by the Crown. Okay? So that should take us a little bit deeper into the real version. Okay, we're going to get a chance to have a look at a bit more at our translation, because our translation is so much more accurate. Okay? But when we come up to talking around the preamble, which is very, very interesting, e Tautama, so you'll see the whole of everything we've been talking about. Everything culminates into exactly what we're talking about in terms of the manipulative way in which, you know, the naked ear of the native indigenous was absolutely taken. Okay, very, very clever, very, very crafty, te roti roti ike. And the way in which they had set up the whole of this document. It's amazing that they got to have the translation that they did, but that it was the only thing, only twice, I think, in fact, that I recall at the moment, that they used it from throughout the times when they took the old money throughout the motu. Okay, tatama? Interesting, eh? Interesting, eh? Now, yeah, but the missionaries were definitely being covered, because when the Crown approached them on this, you know what? The Crown said to them, we are ordering you, we demand you to do this job for us. You're going to make this. So it had to be a couple of years ago, 2 to 3 years before, not a couple of years ago, 2 to 3 years before the actual event of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the old money. Had to be at least then. And then they set to work for the Crown, covering for the missionaries, and not the Crown, but the Crown, covering for the missionaries, and assuring the missionaries they were going to be fine, and they would cover them because they weren't so great at te reo, but they needed them to do the job. The missionaries agreed. They were worried. They were nervous. But everything went fairly well. I don't think they stopped being nervous. I don't think they stopped being worried. And I think they probably just about soiled themselves through the times of the wars, through the times of the land court, through all the protests, the protesting times in the 1890s, 1912. There had to be some real fear in the missionaries from throughout that 100 years, 1854 to 1954. Okay, really, really tricky time for the missionaries after that time. So everything the Crown promised the missionaries too, they never really got. They weren't really that well protected. Okay, and in fact, a lot of the areas that there were wars and big battles, and the Hapu me ko te ariki, they stood up really well and actually took it out. Took some of those walls out, were places where missionaries were really, really strong. So, a bit frightening, I would say, the whole of the period of that time. after 1840. Okay, Tatama, and so we come to the point that we're still talking around the conclusions, the points in time. Tatama, why did they want to control and manipulate the naked ear of the native indigenous? Why? Because it was the only way that this could work, and they knew it. Pretty clever, the missionaries. Pretty clever. Because actually it worked. It worked. And what a massive plan. You can't tell me this took 1 to 3 days. Okay? That's what a lot of the stories around the event say. Oh, the tiriti was put together in 1 to 3 days. You could have fooled me. You could have fooled me. Okay? And so, yeah, that's absolutely not possible. That's absolutely not possible. And when you look how much that from He Whakaputanga, 1835, the reo in itself, and the way it was used, the reo hapu iwi, and the way it was used in Te Tiriti, as opposed to the way it was used in He Whakaputanga, which is where we're going to go when we get back to Wairarapa, we're going to be talking He Whakaputanga, 1835, and moving through that document, because that has a big part to play in the whole of the manipulation that went into Te Tiriti as well. Okay? Next week, when we go into the north, we'll be focused on the 7 months after the first signing. Okay? E tatama? Interesting, eh? Interesting. So let's look at, again, let's recap on some of those ways. I know we've talked a little bit briefly about some of those manipulative ways. Te rori ke noihone. A te krauna ki te tiriti, ki te o mani. Through the Magna Carta. As a result of the Crown scheme to bring together all these instruments and componentries and all of these tools, if you like, into a heist that was, it was detrimental that this should work. Okay? So everything, I think to start off with, the Crown was nervous. I think after the evening, when everything went so well and the tūpunamatua were easily dumbed down, and that's the right word for it too. They were so easily dumbed down, and that's exactly what they were, dumbed down. Okay, because they just didn't know. And the missionaries and the Crown knew that. So by then, they're probably, the Crown, probably their nervousness was just went, whew. They were probably so relieved after that meeting on that evening. So relieved. And this was why they rushed straight away into organising the next 7 months. And then they hastily and excitedly went through the motu, taking Te Tiriti, without even thinking about the lack of transparency, without even thinking about how things looked ethically, without even thinking about any little part in this that was an illegality, e tatauma, without even thinking about the future generations of the Hapu Meko Te Ariki that they were about to destroy. Okay, sad, eh? Very, very sad. And you've got to mourn that period in time. You've just got to. We've had our moments, e tatauma. We've had our moments. You know, because that's how sad this is. But it's true. And this is the reality we want you to come to, even if it smacks you in the head or smacks you right in the nose before you can actually realize that that's actually what that is. That is the reality of exactly what's happened here. The tiriti, the old money, the Magna Carta of New Zealand, the tiriti o Waitangi e ki ane, was an absolute fraud. In fact, it was a heist. And we keep saying it, but it was a heist of massive proportions. Okay, tataima? Okay, get that into your akiterono. Mau tonu ake atu, mau tonu ake atu, mau kita, ki te rono. Kia tino mau ai. Because no more should we be thinking, e tātou mā, that, hoatu noa nei, e ngā tūpuna mātua, he ngeru noiho nei, no te āhua o rātau. Ana, ka hoatu nei, hoatu noa nei e rātau, te mana rangatira o rātau, tūpuna mātua, ki roto ki taua wā tonuna, ki te crown. What a load of, what an absolute crock. Because our tūpuna mātua were not ngeru, you know. They were definitely not ngeru. Okay, which is a cat, by the way. Okay. Harai te ngeru noiho, as you can see. We won a few battles. Even amongst ourselves. So we would, hara, e hake kau, I te ngeru. E hake kau, I te ngeru. So, e tātou mā, so we've got 3 samples that we're going to be using today. One sample of our translation of Te Tiriti, and the English translations that we made. Another sample of the preamble, we'll do that last. That's the preamble, and the real version of the preamble, and our translation, and then the Waitangi Tribunal translation of the preamble. We'll be looking at closely and talking about how they translated the far too concise. That's the main problem with their translation. Far too concise. A little bit additional, again, kua āpiti kupu, but you get that straight across the board. That Māori focus, tō rātai titiro. That one that, tūhoe, I've got this real habit. Pōhe tonu hoe tūhoe. Te reo o rātau, rit te tonu anō, te reo o rātau. Ki roto ki tō tēnā hapu iwi te reo, ki tō tēnā hapu iwi te reo, ki tō tēnā. And that's absolute garbage. Absolute garbage. It's not the same. Doesn't matter how well you know te Māori o te kupu. Doesn't matter how well you know that. Te hanganga mai o te takotaranga kupu I roto I tā tēnā, he rere ke tonu. Okay? From hapu iwi, they differed greatly. Okay? Huge differences from iwi to iwi. So forget what tūhoe say. It rings true, hearing those sorts of statements from tūhoe, it rings true. Haka kau, ia rātau, I te tohunga ki te reo. Rātau o tūhoe. Tūhoe is not tohunga ki te reo. Not if they think of things like that te Māori o te kupu, ori te tonu ki tēnā iwi, ki tēnā iwi, ki te... He tonu atu. He tonu atu. He tonu atu tēnā kōrero I a rātau o tūhoe I roto I te mea e tātou mā. Tō rātau titiro, he titiro pōhehe noi honi. Tō rātau titiro, tō rātau whakaaroa. Aroro tonu atu, a pīnati. Ki roto ki tō tēnā iwi, tō tēnā iwi. Of course, they don't know, kia hatia. They don't know the elements, the componentries of te reo. And the forms and how they are organised exactly from iwi to iwi. They don't know that in tūhoe. They're just guessing. Or, in today's day and age, in the modern age, tūhoe is too much with the thinking that most of the tribes are he hapake tonuiho. He hapake. Hapake hukira. Hapake rā huki te nuinga. Okay? And so that's why they make that brash statement. They make that irrational statement that he ori te tonu. And it's only ori te tonu if, he hapa ke noi honi no tēnā. And that's not the case. See? Just that tūhoe doesn't know that. Tūhoe doesn't know that. See? And that's because of groups like us. Wai maria hoki, me kore ake tonu hoki, tonu anō e tātou mā, mātau, kua tino mau ke ake atu nei, I te nui o te reo ki tō tēnā, te hapu iwi, te motu. Okay? So lucky for that. And we know the differences are huge from hapu iwi to hapu iwi. So forget the statements of tūhoe in that respect. No te mea kai te he rātau. Tino he. Tino he a tūhoe I te mea rahuki. He wāno, after that 100 years, 1854 to 1954, they were pretty much sold on the idea, tūhoe, that everyone else was destroyed. And so, te reo noiho, I te motu, te nuinga, ko te Māori o tūhoe. See, and that's why tūhoe is the way that they are. Ko te Māori o tūhoe, engari kai te hea tūhoe. I think, amongst a lot of I'm not laughing at tūhoe, but I'm laughing at the situation, because the situation is what tūhoe is not understanding. Now, the situation was, even though tūhoe does not still understand that situation, wasn't that everyone was lacking, but kua moea katoa hia. Nā he wāno, te wairua wai wamea, wai wataonga, wai taonga tuku iho. Whakauho hotia. Okay? So, at some point, they were awakened. Okay? And that had to be around about the point that everything was culminating in the rise of the Tahumaakaakanuimatua. A lot of my own mother's work were part of that, culminating in the rise of Tahumaakaakanuimatua. And that's why my mother is, she is rewarded with the title of the chosen one of Wairarapa. And rightfully so. Her work being so befitting in the area, her calibre, her quality of reo, the quality that she gave the tamariki and the mokopuna of those generations. I've watched those tamariki and mokopuna grow into the marvellous adult part of our communities that they are right throughout the country today. And they are doing very, very well. Once they cotton on to all of those taonga that came into place, that were awakened as a result of the work of Nani Marcia, they'll start to pick it all up as well. And all of the work that we've done for Tahumaakaakanuimatua, where I come in, which is where I come in. Ngā taonga tuku iho ōhoku no Tahumaakaakanuimatua katoa. So, but all of these things were awakened already. Nā neni māsia tonu hoki tērā katoa. Okay, not many people are told about that. Okay, but there was a lot of taonga tuku iho that I was holding on to, that I could not reveal. Had I revealed them at the wrong time, it could have been detrimental for Tahumaakaakanuimatua. So I'm so happy I waited for the right time. And that right time came, and thank the Lord, thank the Lord that he guided me through that time. Little did I know that's what the Lord was up to, and brought me to that point in time and said, hey, it's time for Tahumaakaakanuimatua o tia Hapu iwi. And so I set to work. I wasn't quite Christian then. And so it's a bit of a journey to get to where I am. And now a very devout Christian. I'm not closed off to other areas of society. I'm not scared of other areas of society that might not be Christian or that owed to the Lord's kingdom or anything like that. I'm not in terms that I'm not ignorant. I don't mean that I like to hang out with all those areas. I'm not as ignorant as people might think, or naive, I think is a better word. Sometimes people think you're naive. But I can be closed off sometimes. I just have a habit sometimes of closing off, and I think that was mostly the habit I had when I was younger. I mean, it took me 47 years to become a Christian. Let's put it that way. So when I was younger, I had this habit of closing off, and I think Christianity was one of those things that I just never saw myself as something like that. You wouldn't know me now. You wouldn't know me now, actually. But I've still got whānau in all these other different areas of society, and mostly apart from those whānau that I've left. There are some, I've got lots and lots of other whānau. Even over in Australia, I've got lots of other whānau. And, we do really, really well. Okay. Heaps of kōrero in that, Heaps of kōrero in that. And all of that. And so in the recap, let's look at more. And that's why we were looking at Tatauma to focus on I think we started about 1:45, so 1:45 would have been the first. It's about, no, it was after 1, sorry, it's about 1:45, so it's almost 2:45, so the first hour is almost gone. Let's move on into the hour translation of Te Tiriti. That's the first of our samples I always have on my other devices that we're going to work from today. Our sample of our translation of Te Tiriti, the O Mani, the Magna Carta, and we're going to if you're bawling, kai te pai tēnā katoa. You're not the only people in the motu bawling. Over the simple fact that Te Tiriti was definitely a fraud. Hang on, I'll just turn the volume down on this. Definitely a fraud. And yeah. These are the things that happened, and this is why. That's what I'm here to share with you. Okay, so let's look back at our Te Tiriti o Manei Magna Carta. At our when we look at our translation, what I love about it is the reality that sets in as a result of it. Now we knew that people across the Motu wouldn't see that. We knew they wouldn't see that. So, but we put it out there early in 2021, and we left it out there. Aroha mai. I'm just oh, here we go. Here's a copy of our version, and the reality that sets in, and we put it out there to see if anyone else knew, and no one outside of Tahumaakaakanuimatua. Really, really sad, eh? Really, really sad. Aloha mai e tatauma, yeah. Being so serious and passionate about this kaupapa, e tatauma not likely to hold back. So, yeah. But aloha mai, I don't mean to the sadness for most people of the Motu, I could just imagine. Yeah. What a reality to set in. What a reality. But when we look at all those conclusions, hang on, let me look back at my notes there. When we look back at those, the separatist way in which they divided the Hapu me ko te ariki from the Pākehā, not just from the Pākehā, well, mainly from the Crown at that point in time, mainly from the Crown, sorry, and mainly from the Crown. And as time went on, it would have felt as though they had come between Pākehā and Hapu me ko te ariki. Because actually Pākehā were very, very close to our tūpuna mātua. You know, te waka menenga o te rūnanga ko Huiara, many of the Pākehā were involved in it. Okay? So even though the Crown was, they were utterly refusing it. They were being utterly arrogant. Whakahihi katoa rātau. Pāki waha tonu hoki. You know, they did not relent in their will to evade anything of tūturu nature that came out of te wakaminenga o te rūnanga ko hui arai. Okay, and so after 1840, well, it was all over for that unity between us and our Pākehā brethren and sistren, you know. We were about to get divided and divided within ourselves as well. Those are the conclusions that the Crown had reached. This is how feudal they were in 1840. Regardless of what was happening around the world. What we have around the world is, everything, it almost became utopian around the world. What a laugh. What a laugh. Because the absolute opposite was what was happening here. The absolute opposite, the complete opposite. Nothing utopian about what was happening here. Okay? And, our ancestors would not have stood up so much against Crown movements, especially from the 1850s onwards, if the handover of sovereignty had been true. There wasn't a total agreement to that. There wasn't. But the Crown left it at that. But the Crown still added the conundrum into their translation. They said, they ceded sovereignty. No te mea rahu ki tērā āhuatanga I roto I te reo, tō te reo o te tiriti. Me tāna e mea nani. I te wahanga tuatahi, te kupu tuatahi. Te kupu tuatahi dash, te kāwanatanga, kātua, o rā tō wenua. See, according to their culture, their feudal culture, that could be translated as sovereignty. Okay, which wasn't true. It couldn't be translated as sovereignty. That was false. That was actually fraud. Okay? Ask any linguist, ask any professional translator, and when it comes to a nuance, it is the literal translation of that nuance exercised quite clearly within the dash te kāwanatanga. In the first article. Remember when I first pointed that out? So clear now, eh? Why I pointed that out. Hey, so clear. That's the first of our double meanings. Do you see how it works? I want to run through and just recap so that you get the good understanding, the fair understanding, in detail, in depth, as to what we're talking about here. Okay? And what we're talking about is, because our reo can have, in fact, it sometimes can not just have a double meaning, a phrase or a word or a sentence, but it can have many different meanings. Okay? See, but they used double ones in particular. Why? Because they wanted to be able to manipulate this kōrero one way or the other. With the conundrum, this meant the handover of sovereignty. Without it, what this meant was exactly how we've translated it. Dash. Governance capability that is of the same in capacities as that exists presently in their lands, which totally culminates in the original intentions of Te Tiriti. This is how it looked to our tūpuna mātua, to our ancestors. This translation is how it sounded to the naked ear of the native indigenous of that time. Okay? And it was that actually, in actual fact, in actuality, total actuality, that they were expecting. I should imagine by that point in time, the Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi, the Teawa Hapu iwi and the Moai Hapu iwi had suddenly thought, when it came up to signing time, te tā mokohia, te pukapuka nei. You know what? They said to themselves, kahore, kahore. You know why? Because if you were wide awake and you were mahara tonu hoki ko koe, ki roto ki te tū huatanga nei, you suspected that everything was far too good to be true. And that's what we would imagine that, ki tā tō rātou taringa ariki me ko te hapu, tā tō rātou taringa ariki me ko te hapu. Tā te Māori ano kairota. Tā te hapu iwi ano. Kahore. Tino, was too good to be true. And funny that, e tatau mā, because that's what we've always thought. That's what we've always thought. Every time we've heard about te tiriti and people talking about it, we went, hoa oki te, But then we didn't really know whether it was, but it seemed like that. It seemed like a fraud. Yeah. People always asked us, we said, because it's too good to be true. Yeah. See? And the reason it sounded so good, so too good to be true, e tātou mā, was because we saw the devastation. It's just every hapu meko te ariki person in the land almost was struggling right through the years that we grew up. Even while I was, taiohi noiho, tamaiti noiho, I watched people struggle, fight, protest, war even, even jump in the gang so that they could increase the likelihood of the fact that they could punch someone's head in order to get heard. Okay? And get heard that they were a very angry person at what had been done to their ancestors and to them. The utter defilement, the disgusting nature of the deceit. Te rori ke hoki ni, nani o te tū huatanga i riro ai, tēnā mea no o te manarangatira o ngā tūpuna mātua. They took it by stealth. Koina noiho, toro puku noiho, e rā tū huatanga. Okay? And so, you get that, don't you? The original intentions. Once they added the conundrum, he tonuiho. Then your translation goes to exactly what they put in their translation. Sovereignty. Sovereignty. Was that what was given over? Or was it the simple fact that the original intentions were being heeded to by our tūpuna mātua? I think most importantly too, and I think primarily, it was the latter. And not only that, but I tend to think personally, because I'm native, native indigenous of this reo. I think personally, our tūpuna mātua that signed up to Te Tiriti and that arrived at that signing were actually already well organised. That if some of them should sign, that would be how that signing would go down. See how well we know what they were thinking? Because I know a native. I'm not silly. I know a native speaker of the reo, and if you're not, put it away, because you're not going to fool me. You're not going to fool me. I know exactly how they think. I know exactly how they were organised at that time. And I know exactly why things went down in the way they did. And I know that our tūpuna, the Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura, they had already planned that. They said, okay, if this is too good to be true, in the end, if we decide kahore, then kahore it is. But you fellas move forward still and sign. Do you hear me? And that's how things would have went down. That's how all the Tainas would have continued to sign. Why? Because they knew this was good for them to sign. Even under the circumstances, the original intentions were still there, locked into te reo. And so they were right to sign this. But we have to now pick up the pieces from where we're at today and apply those original intentions. Have we got the guts? Well, the Hapu, me ko te ariki, have already started. Okay, yes, we've got the guts, but have you? Okay? Have you? That's more of a question, not to our Pākehā brethren and sisters, but mostly to the politicians of today and to the crowd. Have you got the guts? Yeah. That's a question for them. Okay? Have you got the guts to pick up the pieces and run with the original intentions of Te Tiriti? We shall see. Because after you've gotten used to this reality, how you handle everything from this point in time is utterly crucial, utterly critical to whether you stay in power or whether you stay in the motu. And that's a question to be answered, to be responded to, hopefully with action from the politicians and the Crown members of our society, of modern society today. Okay? Okay, if we have a look at the rest of that, ko te tuatahi, we've explained that well. In the first, ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga me ngā rangatira katoa huki ki hai uru ke taua waka minenga. Simple, but clear. Very, very direct. That's another one of the conclusions of the Crown. They achieved that. Direct. If you're very, very direct, ki tā te hapu me ko te ariki taringa. Tino pai te rātu āhuatanga. Tino pai. Tino pai. Kā reka hoki tēnei kupu ki tā te taringara. O rota tawawa. Not only that, but the Crown and the missionaries, they were it. I'm not joking to you, but in amongst the society and the community at large, at that point in time, they were exactly it. They were the man. We call that the man. Yeah, they were the man. And they used it really, really well, because you know what part of the Crown's aim was to do? Was to utilize this reo. Just like a native speaker of the reo hapu iwi would do, and own it. And that's what they did. They really owned it that day. right in that event. They owned it all. And they even used the steel, just as someone who was native of the steel would do. Okay? See how much power they wielded in the whole of this event. See how much power even that they wielded after the evening of that night. Kakarauri ana te wātonu, you know. They went, lucky for that. You know. And then they took it to the motu. Okay? But all of, quite simple, but very direct, you know? And so that's how we've translated it. There's no room for wishy-washy, you know, like the tribunal. No room for things like that. No room for pitikupu, just straight down the line, because that's exactly how it was. Ki tā te taringa, whakarongorongo, I te kupu nei. This is how it sounded. Ka reka hoki. Ana, in the first, the sovereign chiefs of the Confederation, with all of those of the sovereign chiefs that did not join with that Confederation, grant in absolute to the Queen of England forever governance capability that is of the same incapacities as that exists presently in their lands. Massively orchestrated. That whole kupu. Tēnā kupu. Me te takotoranga kupu. Me te wairua o te kupu. Very, very well put together. Very direct ki tā te taringa. Hapu iwi te taringa. Reo hapu iwi te taringa. Hapu me ko te ariki. Okay? Because that's exactly what the deal was. Have you got the guts? Tākarau. Have you got the guts? You know, whilst all our people right across the motu have got to be mourning this, you know, that this happened, that this is what they did. They heisted our motu, not only from out of our hapu and ariki hands, but out of the future of our Pākehā brethren and sisters. Now we've got to put that right. We've got to put that right too. You know, their future is impacted by this whole thing. How sad. How sad, because they haven't even done anything. This was the Crown that did it. The Crown did all this. Why should they pay? Why should they? I suggest our politicians and the Crown get together and they put together a plan to make sure they pay this bill for everybody, not just for hapu me ko te ariki. Okay? Alright? Ko te tuarua in the second. Ko te kuini o Ingarani, ka waka rite, ka waka ai, ki ngā rangatira, ki ngā hapu, ki ngā hapu. Okay? A very tutura, a very critical word, that word, hapu. Dash. Ki ngā tāngata katoa o New Tirani. New Tirani, Te kōrero anō, te kōrero ki te motu katoa, tēnei kōrero. Te tino rangatiratanga. Okay, again, not not a native indigenous phrase, but still very, very, very effective. So we're still holding on to that very direct nature in the kōrero. Okay, but notice how the promise within that particular part of te tiriti, the start there. Te tino rangatiratanga o rātou wenua, o rātou kāinga, me o rātou taonga katoa. The promises in that are very, very clear and direct. So regardless, whether, you know, te tino rangatiratanga was handed over or not, it still didn't matter. It was clear, ka wakarite, ka wakai. Te kui ni o ingarani, you know. So everything was fine regardless. Cunning, eh? Rori ke. Te ahua o te takoto mai o te kupune. So it sort of still has a double meaning, really, eh? When you look at that. Eh? Ne? There's lots of promises, but then again, they were actually taking it in the first part. So, yeah, really, our tūpuna mātua, those that signed, probably a little bit frustrated, a little bit concerned, a little bit confused. Pō au tia ke tia hoki rātau. Rangirua ke tia hoki rātau. I te āhua o te takoto mai o tēnei kupune, tēnei wāhitonu. Okay? And then we go on, this is that bit that begruntled everybody, I guarantee you. I mean, they all looked at each other and went, especially our lot. Our lots, they would have looked at each other and went, engari tonu. Yeah, engari tonu. Or, engari. That's what they would have said under their breath, perhaps. Engari. But I guarantee you they had already had everything planned by the time it came to the decision to sign. All of Tawa, all of Tahumaakaakanuimatua, all of Moai said, Eta. Kahore. Hoki ki tō whenua. All those kōrero that came about over that day. Hoki ke ake ki tō whenua. Ki tō ake whenua, noho tonu ai. Kawara hoki hara mai ai, ki konei, me e te kawe mai, o te kupu. Oha. Kupu meane, o tiap. E kawe mai nei roto i tā, te tiriti tā te o manei nei. But I would say all of our people probably just got up and left. They'd had enough by that point. Because they made that move, it was obvious it was an orchestrated move. Yeah, that was already decided. And all the rest that signed, that was orchestrated as much as that was too. Because our people, our ancestors, already knew what to expect. So they organised themselves around that. Now, if this deal was a lot better, if the clarity of this deal had carried with it a lot more sounder ideas with it of true partnership and alliance, I think, all three of our Hapu iwi would have sat down pretty quickly and thought a bit differently. and said to each other, me tā moku, ne? Me tā moku. Moko hia, moko hia. Moko moko hia, moko moko hia. Okay, and yeah, so, but yeah, we get to the begruntled part, and this, yeah, again, this became the tool, the main tool for the 1840s into the 1850s. O tia ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga, ne ngā rangatira kātoa atu, ka tuku ki te kuini te hokonga o e rā wāhi wenua, e pai ai te tāngata no na te wenua. Dash. Ki te ritenga o te utu, e waka ritea ai e rātou, ko te kai hoko e mea tia nei te kuini, hei kai hoko mōna. Okay? Now, yeah, again, very, very direct, but not an area that, yeah, they had guts to step into this realm here, because to come was the likelihood of war over 13 years in Wairarapa, but everywhere else as well. Everywhere, yeah. Our Tuakana didn't respond any differently. No one wanted the crown to have access to land, and neither should they have had that. But what did they do? They kept going at it and trespassing our tūpuna mātua, and trespassing te tiriti as well, the old mane, the Magna Carta. Okay, so let's look at the English and just clarify for us through our English version, because we don't airy-fairy it. We don't. I mean, because it's such a straight deal. That's how they wanted it to appear. But you know, our tūpuna, Tahumaakaakanuimatua te awa, e moai, we knew. No. Kahore. Kahore ia mātai. Kahore ia mātai. Tō mātou, yeah. Uti apu ke noi ho te kupune. Uti apu ke noi ho te kupune. You know, because it promised so much. And we had to wait for the delivery. See? So our tūpuna were eta. Now, we're not waiting that long. Tai mate ke hoki mātai i te tauwhanga ke noa ke atu i te whakatinana hia mai o tēnei katoa. Kahore. It promised far too much. And the things that it promised, you know, how long would they have had to wait? You know, for these things to be realized. You know, should they trust the crown? I think not, but I think they made the right decision in that time, but they were right also to get all the rest of the Tēna groups there to sign. Okay, why? Because kai roto tonu I te kupu nei me te straight tiona o te āhua ngā kōre. Okay, so they used that. They went to our crown friends, takahua nei, I te motu. They basically said to them, okay, we'll have a look. Okay, they said, okay, we'll have a look and we'll raise you all these hapu iwi teina me ngā teina katoa. Anō, I roto te tā moko, we'll raise you. Can you meet that demand? Very smart move. Very smart. Very smart to sign. Very smart. Because we can still fix this up in our time. Okay, very, very smart move. Okay. In the second, the Queen of England confirms and guarantees. See, no messing about. No airy-fairy. No āpitikupu. Me tā mea nei, the Waitangi Tribunal translation ra. No te rā wiki tātou mātou, tātou mā no kuang. Ko re roi hoi. Tō tātou nā ano, ko re roi hoi. I te kupu nei. You know, straight down the line. Kia takotoa I tā kupu, pēnā ko tā wano, he takoto wairua ke, ara, wairua pakaha ke nei, I te aho te kupu nei, ana, kia pē nei ke nei. The Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the sovereign chiefs and to the United Tribes and or all super tribes. Koina nā ke hoki te Hapu. United Tribes and or all super tribes. Okay? Okay? Notice that there's no mention of iwi in there. Iwi. Okay? Because that's what a hapu is. It's a super tribe. What iwi does is it describes the nature of the fullest extent hapu that you can get. The character, the makeup, the consistencies, the componentries. Iwi. So without that, without the word iwi, which comes up in He Whakaputanga 1835, mind you, it's got no quotation marks, so I don't know. Yeah, it's... Don't know whether they thought of the use of that word so well. Just the same as for within the preamble, they use the word Māori with the capital M, A-O-R-I, for a people, you know, or peoples, Tutura, that were far from, you know, Māori. You know, they're very gutsy in the end to pull that one. Were they quite confident within themselves? I think they were. Apart from the nerves and you know, the poor missionaries, they had to be really, really worried. Okay? Okay? And or super tribes dash to all the peoples of New Zealand, and we get that. New Tirani, to the whole of the motu. Absolute autonomy. And just to reinforce that in our translation, that's all we do. So I'm just sort of wondering whether the Waitangi Tribunal was sort of encouraged by us. We do that in a couple of places. We put absolute autonomy, but for people who don't really understand what that is, we put all total sovereignty. Okay? So if they didn't understand that word absolute autonomy, which is really what Tino Rangatiratanga is talking about, absolute kingdomship, absolute sovereign rule. Okay? And that's rangatira, the mana of the rangatira, ko ia hoki tērā. The mana of the sovereign, which is the rangatira, first order chief, that chiefly line, the rangatira. A rangatira is also highborn, just the highborn. But in this case, the rangatira we're talking about is the chiefly rank of rangatira, which is another word for which can be defined as sovereign. or total sovereignty over their lands. So that's not actually piti kupu, it's just saying the same thing, just repeating the same thing. And we do that because we know that when people read English, in some cases, some words can seem a little bit difficult to understand. So for those that needed to be clarified just a little, that's why we put or total sovereignty. You know, by then, you fully knew exactly what absolute autonomy meant. And that's all we did. That's all we did. We reinforced little wee parts of the kōrero just to clarify for people. Okay? Which is fine in a translation. Yeah, that's fine. But you can't add any more than that. Like what the tribunal did, they added hundreds. And, you know, that's what it seems like when you read it. When you read it, there's hundreds and hundreds of new contexts that have been added to the text. TeTaiRawhitiAukatiTai o te kōrero. Okay. Total sovereignty over their lands, residences and estates, synonymous, and that's all. That's all. Synonymous with all considered treasured heirlooms by them. Koe nā nui ho, ko tēnā nui ho katoa. Okay? O rātau katoa, me o rātau taonga katoa. That's all. That's all. All considered treasured heirlooms by them. Okay. Even the second part. Yeah, but see, yeah, you see the double meaning in that first part of the second article, but see the double meaning in the second part as well. That even so, even with the disgruntled nature of the tūpuna mātua in that huihuinga, in that gathering, you know, there were some in disagreement. Kaore uti ekore. There were some that were disgruntled at this kōrero, and they were at this part of the kōrero. It still can be taken another way. See? That's the double standard. Utia ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga, ne ngā rangatira katoa atu ka tuku ki te kuini te hokonga wera wāhi wenua e pai ei te tāngata nōna te wenua. But on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs of the Confederation, along with the further sovereign chiefs, grant to the Queen the right of preemption and the purchase of lands among those of the lands conceded to by the proprietors of those lands, which, although still a mouthful, is exactly what is written there. The straight deal is retained in the translation. Okay? And that's the art of translating. You've got to discipline yourself to stick rigidly to exactly what is there. No matter, you know, pēnā hoki ki tā mātou, absolute autonomy or total sovereignty. Okay, you can do things like that, but that's about it, you know, just to clarify a point. It may be a small point to some people, but to those who know te reo, you know where to clarify points. Okay, and that's why we did that there. Okay, but on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs, right up to the dash, okay, proprietors of those lands, and that's all that it says. Okay, at the negotiated price or value as agreed to by them with purchasers. So, see how that looks? See how that looks when you look at this from the point of view of things having been taken under the sovereignty being handed over? Do you see what this means? This means that actually those tupuna matua that signed this agree to this. They actually agree to this. That's what that looks like, a total agreement to this. To the fact that on the other hand, the Queen has right of preemption and we're allowed to push you to sell. That's what that says. We're allowed to push you and put absolute, total weight of the whole of England on your back until we break your back so that you give in. Okay? And you sell that land to us. Okay, so they were forced, and actually they were forced, they were suckered, they were, a number of things, but they were definitely forced. When you look at it definitely forced when you look at things, when you align things to Te Tiritini. Okay, with this treaty, with this Magna Carta, with the O Manini, when you align it all with that, they were forced. They were forced. Okay? And it's no wonder the juniors gave in. Why? Juniors could never get that much. 30%, I've talked to you about 30% to juniorships, 70% to tuakana. The tuakana to seniorships. That was the hereditary right. And you know what? Our juniors wanted more. That's why they started selling land around the Mutu. They started to think about that. 10 or 20, even for our region, Wairarapataratua, 13 years later, they said, mehoko ne, mehoko. Why? Just look at all the promises, We're getting way more than what traditionally we ever used to have. And that was 13 years ago. Hello, at that time, their thinking had changed. This is how impactful colonization can be in an adverse fashion. Okay? That was amongst the most junior, but they were taken for a ride. They were, you might as well say, bashed over, put in a straitjacket. One of those wire helmets were put on top of their head and they were made, shook and electrocuted until they said, okay, you can have access to our lands and you can even transact it. How about that? Later on, the Crown, through the further corrupted deeds able to be carried out via the whenua kōti, Māori, by 1862-65, Māori, the native land court, the Māori land court. See how totally reinterpreted everything had become by 1865. And what did the land court do? It swallowed every bit of land in the Mutu. That's how all our land got taken. And then we were alienated from it all. We couldn't do anything about it, in other words. We couldn't get it back, we couldn't, Shockingly illegal and racist. That was the nature of the parliament, that was the nature of politics in this country, and that was how the Crown treated us in this country. That was how they took over in this country, and that was how they brutally took out and destroyed all of the pillars of our society. All of the good of our culture had been smashed to pieces. Okay? But you see how that looks, hard case. And makes all of that agreed to. See? Now, how could the Crown have made this look legal? Well, they could, it's possible that, I do say they lost the original English translation conveniently, and it may very well be the case. You know why? Because I've got a funny feeling that if we go back to Article 1 and we have a good look at dash, te kāwanatanga katoa o rātou wenua. Okay? I think there may have been some notes there saying that referring to the simple fact that that word and the whole of that process got changed to rangatiratanga instead of kāwanatanga, because that's what you would have needed to make it legal. Okay? To make this a legal exchange and to make sovereignty actually handed over, you would have needed to say, ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga me ngā rangatira kātoa hoki ki hai uru ki taua waka minenga ka tukura wātu te kuini o ingarani a ke tanu atu dash. It would have got snapped real early in the piece. Okay, whatever that could have been, we will probably never ever really know. But let's look at the third. In the third, ko te tuatoru, hei wakaditenga mai hoki tēnei mo te wakaetanga ki te kāwanatanga o te kuini dash. Now, remember back to the Waitangi Tribunal translation, they didn't even translate that part. Oh, ki tēnā. Oh, no. Ana wake o ki tērā. Translating any document, you must translate what's there. You must discipline yourself to be translating what is there. And they didn't do anything at all for that part. So we'll take care of that. This was also set out for the purposes of the negotiated arrangement for full consent to the governance of the Queen. Simply as that. Simply as that. Okay, dash. That the Queen of England resolves further to extend to all indigenous peoples Māori lowercase m. Okay, indigenous peoples of New Zealand, her protections granting to them also all the rights and privileges synonymous with their very own subjects granted to the peoples of England. Kaitipai? Kaitipai? Now, if sovereignty was handed over and that nuance in the first article was able to be translated as te sino rangatiratanga o rātou katoa o rātou wenua, then this would have been absolutely agreed to as well. That it was to be only, and it can be interpreted as only after that, only the governance of the Queen. Okay, so this is why people think in the Motu, one government, one law. See? Because it can be taken as that. But what happens when you Ngamaatoutou hoki, tō whakaro pupuri rawa, ki roto ki ngā kōrero dash, te kāwanatanga katoa, o rātou wenua. What happens if they had to stay like that? Then the governance of the Queen talked about in the third article was merely additional to what was already there. He piti kāwanatanga. He piti tanga. E ki te ana, e whakaaroa nui tia ana, kē tia. I te āhua o tēnei mea te kāwanatanga ki tā te hapu, me ko te ariki. Okay? So how we traditionally saw governance in the motu, that was how we would have interpreted the last article as well. Okay, tatama, let's go quickly on to the wonderful way. Wonderful once you come to that understanding, eh? Okay, wonderful. But we know the original intentions. We know it wasn't two governance bodies, two laws. The incoming, their governance body, obviously the Crown, to take care fully of their people. And the ariki meko, the Hapu, to take full care of theirs. Okay, now, what I forgot to add to that last week is that within that tūturu kāwanatanga, within the governance as cited, as viewed by our Hapu meko te ariki, Pākehā and Hapu had their right of choice. You know, they had, their will, if you like, their own personal will. Their prerogative was totally theirs. That's another part. And I left this for this moment in time to discuss this with you. That actually everyone had their own choice which side they wished to go on. Okay, so even I te taha ki te hapu, even ki te taha ki te hapu, me ko te ariki. If they disagreed, if people disagreed, if groups disagreed, they could easily go under the Crown. They could easily go under, like for today, they could easily go under Westminster, under that system, and stay there, under the Māori of that system, and how that system totally sees us as Māori, which, you know, I still to this day am confused as to exactly what that is. Because according to our tūturutanga, he tonu ho te titiro te rā, te titiro o te rā tūāhua. He rā wā keats, te rā titiro. Hei ai te Māori, ki tā ngā tūpuna mātu. Tēnā Māori, kai te pai tēnā Māori. Mea he tūturu no te rā titiro. We know what that is. We know what that is, tūturu. That particular concept, spiritual, supernatural concept within our cultural, super tribal, spiritual way of doing things. Yeah, we know what that is. But actually, a Māori people, you know, whatever. I never heard of it. Okay? If that indicates a race, just like they talk about in today's parliament, they say Māori is a race of people. So when you talk like about Māori people, you're being race-based within your politics. How do you like that? We didn't even invent that race. So how could we even be that race? We were never ever part of a Māori race. That was invented by the Crown. Okay? And we're talking the New Zealand Crown Corporation. They invented that. They kāpiti atu I tēnā ngā rātai. Okay? And so, yeah, I spoke a wee bit, in a wee bit more length, about some of the outcomes for Hapu me ko te ariki ne. that, yeah, that, yeah, I mentioned a lot of those, but they were mainly worried. Yeah, lots of anxiety from throughout that point in time. I actually don't know who that was, but whoever it was, I'm too busy, and I must carry on with our kōrero aroha mai. Again, yeah, I seem to be taking longer with my kōrero than I planned to, but yeah, let's continue on until we finish this episode of the kōrero on Te Tiriti, because it's highly important that we do. Highly important that we do. Okay, and that in the main, and plus the other things I spoke about, and that I spoke about on Thursday last week. Okay, if you got a hold of that kōrero on Te Kāu, Te Kāu, I did another additional kōrero on Te Kāu on Thursday last week. Okay, and yeah, so if we go into the, I'll just put down that device and I'll grab the other one, because on the other one I've already got opened our files out of the our Lumia office, because within that office we've got loads and loads of files, and that office contains a copy of our translation of the preamble. Now, after we've worked through this copy of our translation, we're going to then take a look. I mean, again, I decided, well, because we've already been using the Waitangi Tribunal sample and example of an English translation of the preamble, of the tiriti of the Old Mani, the Magna Carta, I thought we would go there again for the preamble, and I'll tell you why. Because in actual fact, e tatama, why we need to do that is so that we keep it consistent within our kōrero. It's very symbolic of the English version, Busby's version anyway, or the version that was left to us, which isn't the original, but that is the version from Busby and from the translation done with H.W. Williams on that. Okay, and so without further ado, in the preamble, ko wikitoria te kuini o ingarani. Now, we've got to realize that the preamble is obviously written by Hobson himself. So they add this as a whakataki kupu, he kōrero tīmatanga ki ngā kōrero. Okay? And so this is Hobson's part, and quite extensive kōrero. Yeah, what I cannot understand about the Waitangi Tribunal's version is why they summarized it and they concised it, and wow. You know, this is my sadness. Yeah, it brings me to sadness looking at the translation of the tribunal, because utterly sad how they left out all of the beauty of this kōrero, regardless of te rorirorike, and the fraudulent nature gone into this. The nature of what was being carried out here, it's too obvious. It's too obvious. But in his part too, the initial aim of Hobson is to get the attention immediately. I Ngamaatoutou, immediately, of I Ngamaatoutou of the Tahumaakaakanuimatua. Ki tā te taringa wakarongorongo I kupu reo hapu iwi ngā tāna nei reo taketake reo hapu iwi. This was to take immediately that full control. That's what the preamble was for. That's why this worked so well. It was the preamble. Okay, we think that most of the work went into the tiriti, and we would be right. But so much more went into the preamble. You know why? Because in actual fact, Hobson was none the wiser. Okay? So it would have been as he got into the country. I think he got into the country now. He whakaputanga was put together and done in 1835. I think he got into the country a year after. Or was it in that year? Was it during, I think it was in October of that year that they signed the Wakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence. Ne? And so, yeah. Hobson, couldn't speak a word of fear. He hadn't been in the country. He was so close to the Queen. This is why we're so suspicious that Westminster played a hand in this whole thing. Now, it could have been the nature of his kōrero, the nature of his plans throughout his kōrero. I mean, he had to learn the reo. He had 4 to 5 years to do that, so that by the time te tiriti came about, he was fluent enough to be able to carry this. This was Hobson. He was the main man. Busby was only a resident magistrate. That's all he was. Hobson was a lieutenant, captain of the Royal Navy. Okay, whether he was roped in or not, we have not looked that far yet, because we don't think we need to. We're just going to assume for now, until we can clarify the hypotheses, that he may or may not have known through Busby what the plans were, carried out the plans for te tiriti beautifully well, didn't he? Hobson. But when he got into the country, he knew, kore hoki o honana. Hei mō hio atu. Ki tā te ariki me ko te hapu. Okay, he knew nothing. Okay, so he obviously, another reason why we think this took a couple of years at least. I mean, it would have taken him at least that long to just learn his part, the preamble. Okay? Which says this: Ko wiki tōria te kuini o ingarani I tāna mahara atawai ki ngā rangatira me ngā hapu. There's that word again, hapu, that key word. O nu tirani, I tāna hiahia hoki kia tohungia kia rātou o rātou rangatiratanga, me tō rātou wenua kaumā. That's huge. That's huge. You know, this is what Hobson says. Not bad for someone who just got in the country about 5 years before. Not bad. Not bad. You know, such a straight talking, kōrero like that, so direct. Pai ki tā te taringa, hapu me ko te ariki, pai rawa. Tā te reo take take, pai rawa. Pai hoki, tino pai, tino pai. You know? I mean, you knew straight away what was coming.